Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 91 of UncommonCents. I'm Dean Holmes, running today solo with a little bit of a debrief and rant from my recent time at the Count conference, as well as some of the other things that I've been pondering over the last week. For those that are watching live on LinkedIn right now, thank you. If you give me a little thumbs up through there, if you've got any comments as we go, they can and will come up on the screen. If there's any engagement along the way, let me know. If you're watching it afterwards on YouTube or listening to it on podcasts, definitely reach out with any comments and support along the way. So let's jump in. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about today, there's 5 key topics that we're just going to go through in random order. First one is at the Count conference, Andrew Ibwood gave his usual style of speaking in terms of retiring Australians and gave us a great update in relation to what's happening there. I've heard him speak before and heard him speak about a couple of the topics. Main things for me to share in terms of the updates and just our thinking is there's 98 Australians retiring every hour for the next 5 to 7 years. And so those Australians are going to be having to ask questions at that point in time. And they're either going to ask questions of their financial advisor or they're going to ask questions of their superannuation fund. And so we should be thinking in and around this as we continue to move forward. Couple of interesting points to think about. Complexity. He's highlighted that there's about $44 billion worth of farms that need to change hands through this next 5 to 7 years in terms of retirement. $50 billion worth of private businesses that need to change hands over the same period as well. And that is very small compared to the $1 trillion in property and obviously the value in superannuation. But the farms and family businesses come with complexity, whereas property and superannuation is a little bit more simpler in its passing to the next generations. And so farms and businesses is where advisors, accountants, solicitors, financial advisors, etc., can play a big role in supporting clients through that transition. So if you're thinking about working with clients that might have farms or inherit farms, as well as family businesses, there's a lot of complexity that needs to be worked through there. Andrew highlighted as well, 1/3 of estates are being challenged in some way. So the importance of really well-documented estate plans is key through that process. And then the final thing that he spoke about was this life cycle of a client, which is really interesting, a life cycle of a client relationship. And so he's highlighting there is a 36-month period whereby we go from, using his language, chaos to order. And so that is getting clients obviously financial well organized, taking them through the entire financial planning process. And then from there, they get comfortable. And so what he was highlighting, what's a great thing for us to think about is that what is the end of that journey after the 36 or as you approach the 36 months? We almost need a complete review of the client situation, start from first principles, because they've probably forgot some of the things you might have taught them 36 months ago. They may need obviously just a strategy refresh, but it's also an opportunity to re-cement the relationship for the next 36 months. And the longer the time goes on, the clients start to forget all the great things that you may have done 36 months ago. And so that's why it's a really good opportunity to reset and restructure that relationship as well. Next thing that I've been pondering over the last week is just some conversations I've been having with advisors, just in relation to how we're discussing the different versions of superannuation. And so I'm just going to go through a bit of a case study of conversations that we've been having lately. And so first and foremost, we're thinking about this in terms of how we're talking to clients about perhaps where their current superannuation is invested with an industry superannuation fund, and then how we want to contrast and talk about the alternatives, which I really call advisor-led solutions. So I'm not talking about self-managed super funds, but really the retail advisor-led solutions. And so the contrast between these two is really important to get clients understanding some of the reasons that they might be moving. And these reasons can be a little bit different to what we might have used in the past. So one of my stories to think about is actually that the real reason to move is actually now a technology-led advice. And so what I mean by that is that most of the industry super funds haven't invested that much in their platform capability over the last 10 or 15 years. They're still obviously unitized, pooled, sharing the capital gains tax, everything that we know as advisors. but predominantly we haven't focused on the reason why we might want to move them to a different solution is in around this technology for the next 15 years. So what type of accounts are going to be right for the client for the next 15 years of portfolio management, strategy implementation, managing the CGTs of portfolios is all in this new type of portfolio. Now, none of that's new. We've known all of those things, but what I'm focused on is the story that goes around it from a client's perspective. So now every client knows and understands the importance of what the difference is between a Nokia 3610 and an iPhone. And yet we're still using the technology with industry super funds that were in existence 10 years ago. And so this story of going, first and foremost, we want to upgrade the core technology that your superannuation is sitting on is actually a really relevant strategy and story to talk to clients. We can then easily talk to the clients on top of that about everything about how we go and implement strategies, implement investment changes, get access to managed accounts and pension refreshes without actually selling portfolios. These are technology-led strategy outcomes that we can't do within that old structure or that old unitized structure. And so when we get to the point of talking to clients about the rationale for moving between these providers, this is then one of the rationales in relation to it. Second rationale in terms of the conversations that I've been pondering with advisors is how essentially the price of an industry super fund is the same for each member. They're, as we know, profit for members, but the profit for members on the investment side of the spectrum, every member pays the same amount when it comes to a member account balance. So they might pay $1 a week or $2.50 a week, however it's worked out. And so from a service perspective, therefore, each member is treated entirely equally at that point in time. And this will lead to frustrations over time, whereas people that have higher wealth do want a little bit more service as they go along. And so none of the industry super funds, to my knowledge anyway, have understood that there could be a different phone number if you've got more than a certain amount of money. They send out statements, they put phone numbers on their website after you've logged in, but this phone number is the same for each and every person, whether you've got 5,000 or $2 million within the industry super fund. There's no differentiation in service. Whereas obviously in the advisor-led solution, there's two levels of differentiation of service. You've got an individual advisor that might be able to obviously answer your phone call within the business, but then those advisors get access to different tiers of service within the product providers based on how well they're working with that individual product provider. And so the journey that we're thinking about in terms of the second conversation we're having with clients around the technology being first, but then service being second, is actually that we're not going to get the quality of service from these providers at this point in time because they're not investing in their service in a way in which the rest of the community would see the service growing as you actually have more wealth. So the concept of private banking, for example, you get a better level of service because you owe the bank a certain amount of money. We don't get that within the industry super funds at this point in time. They might watch this and then implement a new strategy, but still then they're going to be years behind everyone else. Final thing in relation to the technology-led solution for these advisor-led investment platforms is thinking finally about the ability to access different investments. And so I'm going to talk a little bit next week actually about the rise of managed accounts. It's obviously been rising for a while. And so this technology allows for advisor-created and managed accounts to come in as part of that solution. So we're going to work on that next week. So if you join me next week for that particular part, but these three elements is what now I see forms a really great conversation with clients in and around how they want to manage their superannuation assets going forward. And it's not about comparing the fees of any of these providers. We obviously need that done in the advice. But what we're agreeing is that we'd like to potentially pay a little bit more to a provider in order to get better service, or we'd like to pay a little bit more to a provider in order to get a better quality technology platform to manage our investments going forward. Next thing, continuing the investment theme, but another conversation that I've been having recently in and around investments, and it's linked to what we just discussed, is actually making sure that we've got our investment philosophy really clearly documented and implemented within our practice. So at the moment, we're having a series of questions and product phases. Everyone knows what those are. However, there's a couple of new ones that keep popping up at this point in time. And so when we've got this situation of having these type of product changes, what we've got to be clear on at the same time is that what is our investment philosophy? Because we want to fall back to first principles when and if this happens. So what I mean by that is that if clients got a question in relation to any of these changes to investments, we're actually reflecting on that and saying it's really clear that we have an investment philosophy. And the best way to answer this, your question, Mr. Client, is actually to go, now we have this investment philosophy that I want to take you through. And by taking you through this investment philosophy, you will see that we would have never made those particular investments because those investments are contrary to our investment philosophy. So the reflection is making sure, if we haven't got it within our practice, that we've got a documented investment philosophy, but it's from the client's perspective, not a compliance or internal perspective. And so it needs to be short, simple. Your ability to articulate it needs to be, frankly, under 5 minutes in order for the client to understand what you're talking about in terms of your investment philosophy, not for compliance or your colleagues to understand what your investment philosophy is. So have it documented from a client's perspective and make sure that it's followed by all. So in a practice, we do not want deviations from an investment philosophy. You might have individual clients with variations based on their needs, but we still need to have that core investment philosophy that it's followed by all. We know our value isn't in picking managed fund A over managed fund B. And so we need to actually move up the line in terms of our investment philosophy overall. Next thing was around reflecting on the technology related things in the conference. And obviously, I'm going to get up to talking about AI through this process. But the first one before that was actually just reminding ourselves that the technology led solution is in two components, AI, but more importantly, in this automation. And so, what we struggle with in some of our businesses is passing this digital football of a task through one, two, three, four staff members or more potentially in order to get anything done. And so while that's relevant and necessary for some of our businesses, we have to be cautious around how many times we pass it without automation, because every time we pass it, there's a chance that the ball can get dropped. And so being clear on what the processes are and then working to automate these over time is going to help. Obviously, automating the booking and organization of the reviews and things like that is a great place to start from a client perspective. And the quickest win that you can do from today is actually as simple as clicking delayed send on your email. So you might have done an email later at night at the point in time in Microsoft, and it suggests that you send the email at 8 o'clock the next morning, and you click a button and it's done. And that delayed send is great. So you don't ruin people's evenings with the emails that you're sending. But that particular tool can be used to delayed send emails for any point in time in the future. And so what you can do is schedule follow-ups immediately after your meeting or interaction. You can schedule birthday emails if you do that. You can schedule emails to go out in 6 months' time to book the next review meeting. And so the ability for you to do this in your system is really easy. And that's the very basic level of automation that you can put into your business. That if a client says, follow me up in 3 months, you are following them up today with a delayed send email and you don't have to worry about it. And it just automatically goes out in 3 months' time. And so that's a really good way of thinking about it. And finally, we were talking about AI. No kind of conference at this point in time gets away without mentioning this particular content. And so a couple of things that were really important through this process was, first and foremost, that it's okay to be a fast follower. So you don't have to invent AI in your small business, nor do you have to trial lots of AI. I think the idea that there's a lot of things here and we're getting distracted with all these bright, shiny toys in relation to it. And you don't have to sign it. You don't have to be the people that are trialing each and everything in order to give the company feedback as to whether they're doing it. It's okay to wait. My advice and what we saw through the conference is actually wait a little bit to adopt the proven tools and wait for the other tools to be proven before you make a business investment in implementing that tools. And the reason why that is that putting any of these tools into your business is not technology, it's about change management. So the idea of bringing in any type of AI is actually all about changing the way in which everyone works in their business going forward. And so this idea that you can just create, you sign up to a technology and immediately everyone's going to adopt it is impossible. And so thinking of this as any piece of additional technology that you add into the business, there needs to be an entire change management process around that, because the AI first concept of before I do any task, I'll see if AI can do it is an absolute change in the way in which you work every single day. And unless you treat that as change management within your organizations, then everyone is just going to play with it for a little bit and then literally drop back to their old ways because they don't know how important the change is to implement constant and forever change in your practice. And so it was really important to think about that. And the final thing in terms of our presentation from Michelle at CFS in relation to AI was actually the Microsoft agents within Copilot. So there's some default ones in there, as well as your ability to build your own. The ones that I'm talking about at the moment, the build your own, is outside of today's discussion. But the most important two that were actually within the system that everyone can use today was firstly the prompt coach. So the ability to use AI to sharpen your prompts over time. So if you're using prompts, use the Copilot agent to review your prompts, and it's going to give you some feedback in terms of improving that over time. It's very useful. Second one was actually Researcher. So this has been out for a little while, but I was reminded of this. Researcher will do an incredibly high amount of research into a particular topic for you. And what it actually does is it does all that research in the background. So I set it off on a task to do some research into the history of superannuation. The AI engine was running for 5 minutes before it gave me the results. And so it was researching all the legislation back till 1993 in order to give me a summary of the history of superannuation, which I thought was pretty powerful. Second thing it's done recently is it drafted me a share sale agreement, a 5-page agreement in relation to the sale of some shares. I gave it the shareholders agreement, a little bit of context, and it produced a non-lawyer approved, of course, document that can either be reviewed by a lawyer or can be used if you'd like to do. So that was Researcher. And the final one is Analyst, which is doing all the mathematical analysis. So if you've got spreadsheets with all your client fees, spreadsheets with all your client demographics, or spreadsheets with like investment transactions and things like that, it's a great way of putting it into Researcher and actually having it analyze those spreadsheets, produce charts, analysis, fee impacts, demographic charts in relation to your clients and things like that. So that's all available within Copilot, but more specifically within the free Copilot through that process. And the final thing was the best quote of the day in relation to AI. And that was that AI is a little bit like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it. Not many people are actually doing it. And if they are doing it, they're terrible at it. And that was a guide to just remind us that we're still at the front end of this process, and a little bit less talk and probably a little bit more practice on small elements within our practice was the key in order to keep that focus in the business. So that is it for today. So no questions from my colleague, but follow on for next week's episode where we're actually doing a deep dive into the journey of managed accounts, both building your own and partnering with people to help you leverage the investment solutions within the business. So that's locked in for same time next week. And thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.